A humble elderly woman was denied a test drive until her son, the dealership owner, showed up. The morning sun glinted off rows of polished vehicles at Midwest Motors, the largest dealership in Indianapolis. Dorothy Miller, a petite 74-year-old with silver hair neatly pinned back in a bun, adjusted her simple cardigan as she approached the showroom entrance. Her 10-year-old Buick had finally given up the ghost after 200,000 faithful miles, and though the thought of a new car purchase intimidated her, Dorothy was determined to handle it herself. "Good morning," she said softly to the young receptionist, who barely glanced up from her computer. "Someone will be with you shortly," the girl replied, returning to her typing. Dorothy stood patiently, taking in the gleaming showroom. Retirement had been comfortable thanks to careful saving and her late husband's pension, but she rarely indulged in luxury. Today would be different. After researching extensively online at the public library, she had decided on a modest SUV with good safety ratings and fuel economy. "Can I help you?" A salesman finally approached, coffee cup in hand. His name tag read Brad Anderson. He was perhaps 30, with an expensive haircut and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, I'm interested in the Traverse," Dorothy said, pointing to a blue SUV displayed prominently in the center of the showroom. Brad's smile faltered slightly. "That's a very popular model. Were you looking for someone in particular? Is your husband or son joining you today?" Dorothy straightened her shoulders. "No, I'm here on my own. I've done my research and would like to test drive the Traverse. Please." Brad glanced around the showroom, then back at Dorothy. "Well, we're quite busy today. Test drives require a considerable amount of paperwork and a valid driver's license. Perhaps you'd like to just sit in the display model for now." Dorothy felt her cheeks warm. "I have my license right here," she said, opening her purse. "And I'm prepared to fill out whatever paperwork is necessary." Of course," Brad said, his tone patronizing. "But these vehicles have quite advanced technology. The learning curve can be challenging for some older drivers. Maybe you'd prefer something more basic." Dorothy had spent 30 years as a high school mathematics teacher before retirement. She'd mastered computers, smartphones, and even helped her neighbors program their smart home devices. The implication that she couldn't handle a modern car dashboard stung. "I'm perfectly capable of learning new technology," she replied evenly. "I understand," Brad said with a condescending smile. "But company policy requires a credit check before test drives, and the paperwork can take hours to process. Perhaps you could come back another time with a family member." As Dorothy stood there, feeling increasingly invisible, a commotion at the entrance caught her attention. A tall man in a tailored suit strode in, speaking animatedly on his phone. Several employees straightened up immediately, their expressions shifting from boredom to alertness. "Yes, we'll finalize that deal tomorrow," the man said, ending his call. "Jennifer, I need the April projections on my desk by noon," he instructed the receptionist, who was suddenly all smiles and efficiency. Dorothy felt a rush of warmth as the man turned and their eyes met. A broad smile spread across his face. "Mom, what a surprise!" he exclaimed, crossing the showroom in long strides. You should have told me you were coming in today." Brad's expression transformed to one of confusion as James Miller, owner of Midwest Motors and son of the woman he'd been dismissing, embraced Dorothy warmly. "Jim, I wanted to handle this myself," Dorothy whispered. "Mrs. Miller," Brad stammered. "I had no idea you were—" "My mother," Jim finished, his arms still around Dorothy's shoulders. The affection in his voice was genuine, but there was a new edge to his tone. "And one of the smartest people I know. So, Brad, how's the test drive going?" Brad's face drained of color as he glanced between Dorothy and Jim. "I was just explaining our test drive policy to Mrs. Miller," he stammered, tugging at his collar. "Our policy?" Jim's eyebrow arched. "Which policy would that be, Brad?" "The one where we treat every customer with respect, regardless of age or appearance, or perhaps you were explaining our mission statement about providing exceptional service to everyone who walks through that door." The showroom had grown quiet. Other salespeople pretended to be busy with paperwork while stealing glances at the unfolding scene. "I was just about to prepare the paperwork," Brad said quickly. "If you'll excuse me, I'll get everything ready for Mrs. Miller's test drive immediately." "That won't be necessary," Jim replied, his voice level but firm. "Mark will assist my mother today." He nodded toward an older salesman across the room, who promptly approached with a genuine smile. "It would be my pleasure, Mrs. Miller. I've got a Traverse ready to go whenever you are." Dorothy felt conflicted. While vindicating, the situation was also deeply uncomfortable. She'd spent a lifetime handling her own problems, teaching her students and her son to stand up for themselves and others. Jim had clearly learned that lesson well, but she hadn't come here seeking special treatment. "Jim, a word please," she said quietly, guiding him toward a more private corner of the showroom. Mom, I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, but that's not how we treat people here," Jim said, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that Dorothy's heart clenched. Dad would have been furious. "Your father would have handled it with dignity," Dorothy replied gently, just as he handled everything. Robert Miller had built Midwest Motors from nothing, starting with a small used car lot and eventually expanding to the multi-franchise dealership it was today. He'd been known throughout Indianapolis for his integrity and fairness, qualities he'd instilled in their only son. "You're right," Jim sighed, "but seeing him dismiss you like that, it made my blood boil." Dorothy patted his arm. "I know, sweetheart, but I didn't come here as the owner's mother. I came as a customer, and I'd like to be treated like any other customer. No better, no worse." Jim studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but at least let Mark help you. He's our best salesperson, and he treats everyone with respect." "That sounds perfect," Dorothy agreed. As they turned back toward the showroom, Dorothy noticed Brad standing by the reception desk, looking anxious as the manager spoke to him in hushed tones. "Jim, what's going to happen to that young man?" she asked. Jim frowned. "Company policy is pretty clear about discrimination, Mom. I don't think he's a bad person," Dorothy said thoughtfully. "Just misguided, maybe thoughtless." "That's generous of you. I spent 30 years teaching teenagers, remember? Sometimes people need correction, not punishment." Jim's expression softened. "What do you suggest?" Dorothy thought for a moment. "Let him finish out the day, then perhaps assign him to shadow Mark for a week. He could learn a lot about how to treat customers with dignity." Jim shook his head with a smile. "Still teaching, aren't you?" "Always," Dorothy replied. Mark approached with a tablet in hand. "Mrs. Miller, I've pulled up the information on the Traverse models we have in stock. Would you like to discuss features before the test drive?" "That would be lovely," Dorothy replied. As Mark led her toward the display model, explaining its safety features and technology, Dorothy couldn't help but notice Brad watching from across the showroom, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and relief. "I'll pick you up for dinner tonight, Mom," Jim called after her. "We can talk about your new car then." Dorothy waved in acknowledgement, already engrossed in Mark's explanation of the vehicle's driver assistance features. Despite the morning's rocky start, she felt a surge of independence. This would be her first car purchase without Robert by her side. But she was ready. The Traverse hummed smoothly as Dorothy navigated through the familiar streets of Indianapolis. Mark sat in the passenger seat, occasionally offering directions but mostly letting her get a feel for the vehicle. "Take a left up here if you'd like to try it on the highway," he suggested. "The adaptive cruise control is really something." Dorothy signaled and made the turn, appreciating how responsive the steering felt. "It handles beautifully," she commented. "Much better than my old Buick." "Cars have come a long way in 10 years, Mark agreed. "This model has all the latest safety features: automatic emergency braking, lane keeping assist, blind spot monitoring." As they merged onto the highway, Dorothy felt a surge of confidence. The vehicle seemed to anticipate her needs, adjusting seamlessly to the increased speed. "You're a natural," Mark observed. "How long have you been driving, Mrs. Miller?" "Since I was 16. Dorothy replied with a small smile. That's nearly 60 years now. Robert, my late husband, taught me in an old Ford with a manual transmission. If you can master a clutch, you can drive anything. Mark chuckled. Don't see many of those anymore. My son's learning to drive now, and he's never even seen a manual transmission. Times change, Dorothy said, activating the turn signal to pass a slower vehicle. But some things stay the same. Good driving is still about awareness and respect for others on the road. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Mark spoke again. I've worked for your son for 8 years now. He's a good boss, fair, honest, just like his father was. Dorothy felt a rush of pride. Jim learned a lot from watching Robert run the business. He wasn't always sure he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. You know, he studied architecture in college. I didn't know that, Mark said. What changed his mind? Robert got sick, Dorothy replied simply. Pancreatic cancer. It moved quickly. Jim stepped in temporarily at first, just to keep things running. But he discovered he had a knack for the business. He's expanded considerably since taking over. Dorothy nodded. Robert would be proud, though I think what would make him proudest is how Jim treats people. That was always Robert's top priority, treating customers and employees with dignity. As they exited the highway, Dorothy's thoughts drifted to the morning's confrontation. Brad's dismissive attitude had stung, but it wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated because of her age or gender. After Robert died, she'd faced similar treatment from their financial advisor, who had spoken to her as if she were a child, rather than a woman who had managed household finances for decades. What did you think of the adaptive cruise control? Mark asked, breaking into her thoughts. Impressive, Dorothy replied, though I prefer to keep my hands on the wheel. Many customers your age say the same thing, Mark remarked, but it's nice to have the option, especially on long trips. As they pulled back into the dealership lot, Dorothy had made her decision. The Travers felt right, safe, comfortable, and with enough technology to be useful without being overwhelming. Brad was standing near the entrance when they returned, helping an older couple with a sedan. He glanced up as Dorothy parked, his expression carefully neutral. So, what's the verdict? Mark asked, as they walked back into the showroom. I'll take it, Dorothy said decisively. The blue one, just like this test model. Excellent choice, Mark beamed. Let's get the paperwork started. Would you like me to call Jim to go over the numbers? Dorothy shook her head. No need. I've done my research. I know what a fair price is, and I'm prepared to negotiate. Mark looked momentarily surprised, then smiled. I should have expected nothing less from Jim Miller's mother. Not Jim's mother right now, Dorothy reminded him gently. Just a customer buying a car. Of course, Mrs. Miller. Right this way to my office. As they passed Brad and the older couple, Dorothy heard him explaining the vehicle's features with newfound patience. He caught her eye briefly and gave a small, respectful nod. Progress, Dorothy thought. Sometimes lessons came from unexpected places. In Mark's office, Dorothy reviewed the numbers carefully, asking pointed questions about warranties, maintenance packages, and financing options. She'd come prepared with printouts from consumer websites showing invoice prices and average selling points. You've certainly done your homework, Mark commented, adjusting his offer after her counterproposal. This price is below our usual margin, but still fair to both parties, Dorothy pointed out. Robert always said, the best deal leaves everyone feeling satisfied, not victorious. Mark nodded in agreement. He was right, and at this price, I think we can both be satisfied. Thursday evening found Dorothy and Jim seated at their favorite table at Rosselli's, an Italian restaurant they'd been frequenting since Jim was in high school. The familiar scent of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air as they reviewed the menus they practically knew by heart. Antonio's watching again, Jim noted with amusement, nodding toward the elderly owner who stood by the kitchen, beaming at them. Dorothy smiled. He still remembers when you'd only eat spaghetti with butter and insisted the meatballs be served on a separate plate. I was 7, Jim protested, and very particular. Some things never change. Dorothy teased. Your father was the same way. Everything in its proper place. Their waitress approached, a young woman with a warm smile. The usual, Mrs. Miller, eggplant parmigiana, and a glass of house red. You know me too well, Sophia. And for you, Mr. Miller, the veal marsala tonight, I think. And we'll share an antipasto. After Sophia departed, Jim leaned forward. So, Mark tells me you drove a hard bargain yesterday. I paid a fair price, Dorothy replied, folding her napkin across her lap. The dealership still made a profit. A slim one, Jim chuckled. He said you came armed with more research than most of our business customers. The internet is a wonderful thing, Jim. The library has computers available for public use. Jim's expression softened. Mom, you know I would have given you the family discount, which is exactly why I didn't tell you I was coming in, Dorothy replied. I wanted to do this on my own terms. Their antipasto arrived, a colorful array of marinated vegetables, cheese, and cured meats. As they began to eat, Jim broached the subject that had clearly been on his mind. I spoke with Brad yesterday afternoon, he said carefully. Following your suggestion, Dorothy selected a piece of provolone. And he was mortified once he realized who you were, kept apologizing profusely. I wasn't looking for apologies, Dorothy noted. Just respect. I know. I made that clear. Jim speared an olive. I also told him that treating the owner's mother disrespectfully was bad, but treating any customer that way was worse. How did he take it? Better than I expected. He admitted he made assumptions based on your age and appearance. Jim hesitated. He mentioned his grandmother recently had to give up driving after several minor accidents. I think he projected that situation onto you. Dorothy nodded thoughtfully. That explains some of his condescension. Still doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't. But he seemed genuinely remorseful, not just worried about his job. Jim took a sip of water. He's shadowing Mark this week, as you suggested, and I've enrolled him in our customer service training program again. Good, Dorothy said simply. Their main courses arrived, steaming and aromatic. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Jim spoke again. Your new car will be ready tomorrow. They're detailing it and installing the extra floor mats you wanted. Perfect timing, Dorothy replied. I've got bridge club in the afternoon. Jim studied his mother across the table. In the soft lighting of the restaurant, she looked both fragile and formidable. Exactly the paradox she'd always been. After his father died 3 years ago, she'd grieved deeply, but had emerged from that grief with a quiet determination to continue living fully. What? Dorothy asked, noticing his thoughtful gaze. I was just thinking about how proud Dad would be of you, Jim said softly. Buying a car on your own, negotiating like a pro. Dorothy's eyes misted slightly. Your father taught me a lot about standing my ground. He never once made me feel less capable because I was a woman. He set a high bar, Jim agreed, for both of us. And you've cleared it beautifully, Dorothy assured him, reaching across to squeeze his hand. The business is thriving, and more importantly, you've maintained the values he built it on. Jim nodded, emotions making it momentarily difficult to speak. I miss him every day, he finally said. So do I, sweetheart. So do I. They finished their meal with talk of lighter things. Jim's daughter Emma's upcoming college graduation, Dorothy's garden plans for the spring, the community theater production they'd both volunteered for. As they waited for dessert, tiramisu to share, another tradition, Jim raised his water glass. To new beginnings and old wisdom, he toasted. Dorothy smiled, touching her glass to his. And to being seen, she added quietly. Friday afternoon sunshine streamed through the windows of the dealership as Dorothy signed the final paperwork for her new car. Mark had everything organized efficiently, explaining each document without condescension. And that's the last one, he said, as she signed the delivery receipt. Congratulations, Mrs. Miller. The Traverse is officially yours. Thank you for making this so painless, Dorothy replied, returning the pen. My pleasure. Now, let me show you how to pair your phone with the vehicle's Bluetooth system before you drive off. As they walked toward the delivery area where her blue Traverse waited, gleaming under the showroom lights, Dorothy noticed Brad assisting an elderly gentleman with a sedan across the floor. He was listening attentively, crouched down to demonstrate something at the older man's eye level, rather than talking down to him. Mark followed her gaze. "He's doing much better," he commented. "Quick learner when he puts his mind to it." "Good," Dorothy said simply. At the vehicle, Mark patiently walked her through the technology feed, making sure she was comfortable with the touchscreen interface and voice command. Dorothy absorbed it all, asking pertinent questions and testing each feature herself. "You're catching on faster than most customers half your age," Mark observed. "I may be old, but my brain still works just fine," Dorothy replied with a small smile. "Never doubted it for a moment," Mark assured her. "Is there anything else you'd like to review before you take delivery?" Dorothy glanced toward the management office. "Is Jim available? I'd like to say goodbye before I leave. He's in a conference call, but I can interrupt him for you." "No need," Dorothy decided. "I'll just tell him I'll see him Sunday for dinner." As Mark handed her the keys, Brad approached hesitantly, keeping a respectful distance. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice steady but humble. "Before you go, I wanted to apologize properly for how I treated you when you first came in. There's no excuse for my behavior. I made assumptions that were unfair and disrespectful." Dorothy regarded him thoughtfully. His remorse seemed genuine, not merely a performance for job security. "Apology accepted, Brad," she said finally. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them." Relief washed across his face. "Thank you, and if I may say so, you've chosen an excellent vehicle. The Traverse has the highest safety ratings in its class." "I know," Dorothy replied with a hint of amusement. "That's why I requested it specifically." Brad nodded, a new respect evident in his expression. "Enjoy your new car, Mrs. Miller." As he walked away, Mark handed Dorothy a gift bag. "A little something from all of us. It's tradition for first-time buyers." Inside, Dorothy found a Midwest Motors coffee mug, a keychain, and a handwritten card signed by the staff, including Brad. Jim's bold signature was at the bottom with a small note. "Proud of you, Mom. Drive safely." Emotion welled up unexpectedly. For a moment, she felt Robert's presence so strongly, she almost turned to share the moment with him. After 50 years of marriage, these phantom conversations still happened regularly. "You'd love this car, Robert," she thought. "So many bells and whistles. Remember that old station wagon we bought when Jim was born? How you fretted over safety ratings and insisted on the extra rust-proofing?" Mark misinterpreted her silence. "Oh, is everything all right, Mrs. Miller?" "Yes," she assured him, blinking back the moment of melancholy. "Just thinking about how much has changed since I bought my first car." "I imagine quite a lot," Mark said kindly. "The technology, certainly," Dorothy agreed. "But people remain fundamentally the same. We all want respect, dignity, and occasionally a second chance to get things right." Mark nodded, seeming to understand she wasn't just talking about cars "Well," Dorothy said briskly, gathering her purse and paperwork, "I have a bridge game to get to. Ladies wait for no one, especially when there's gossip to be shared." Mark laughed. "Enjoy your new car, Mrs. Miller, and please call if you have any questions at all." "I will," she promised, settling into the driver's seat. As she adjusted mirrors and seat position, Dorothy felt a surge of satisfaction. This moment represented more than just a new vehicle. It was an affirmation of her continuing independence, her ability to navigate the world on her own terms. Even as she grew older, starting the engine, she enjoyed the quiet purr, so different from the temperamental roar of her first car, a used Chevrolet she'd saved for while working summers at her father's hardware store. Robert had helped her maintain that old vehicle, teaching her basic mechanics along the way. "Never depend completely on others for things you can learn to do yourself," he'd advised. She'd carried that philosophy throughout her life, tackling new challenges with quiet determination. This car purchase was just the latest example. Dorothy pulled carefully out of the dealership lot, the new car responding smoothly to her commands. She felt visible, capable, and very much alive. Sunday evening found the Miller family gathered around Dorothy's dining room table. Jim and his wife Claire sat across from their daughter Emma and her boyfriend Tyler, while Dorothy placed a steaming casserole in the center of the table. "Grandma, the new car looks amazing," Emma enthused. "Dad said you negotiated like a pro. Your grandmother taught economics before switching to mathematics," Jim reminded her. "She knows her way around a balance sheet. It's just common sense." Dorothy demurred. "Research thoroughly, know your bottom line, and be prepared to walk away if necessary." "Life lessons from Dorothy Miller," Claire said warmly, passing the salad. "I use that strategy with my clients all the time." As they settled into dinner, conversation flowed easily from Emma's upcoming graduation to Claire's interior design projects and Jim's latest business challenges. Tyler, still somewhat new to these family gatherings, mostly listened, occasionally contributing thoughtful comment. "Tyler, more potatoes," Dorothy offered. "Yes, please, Mrs. Miller. This meal is delicious. Call me Dorothy, please." "Mrs. Miller makes me feel like I'm still in the classroom. Once a teacher, always a teacher," Jim teased. "Mom still corrects my grammar when I slip up." "Someone has to maintain standards," Dorothy replied primly, but with a twinkle in her eye. As Emma launched into a story about her senior project, Dorothy's gaze traveled around the table. These Sunday dinners had been a tradition since Robert's passing, Jim's way of ensuring she didn't spend too much time alone, though she suspected he needed the connection as much as she did. After dinner, while Claire and Emma cleared the dishes despite Dorothy's protests, Jim and Tyler moved to the living room to discuss the latest basketball scores. Dorothy made coffee in the kitchen, listening to her granddaughter's animated chatter about post-graduation plans. "Tyler and I are thinking of moving to Chicago," Emma confided. "There are more opportunities in architectural preservation there." "That's quite a change," Dorothy observed, keeping her voice neutral despite the pang at the thought of Emma moving farther away. "It is," Emma agreed, "but we'll come back often. These Sunday dinners are non-negotiable." Dorothy smiled, touched by the declaration. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, following your passion like this." "I wish he could have met Tyler," Emma said softly. "He would have approved," Dorothy assured her. "Anyone who makes you light up the way Tyler does would have won Robert over immediately." Later, as the family gathered in the living room for coffee and the apple pie Dorothy had baked that morning, Jim raised his cup. "To Mom and her new wheels," he toasted. "May you have many adventures." "Here's hoping those adventures stay within the speed limit," Claire added with a laugh. "Jim told us about your highway test drive." "I merely drove competently," Dorothy protested. "Mark was never in any danger." "Speaking of the dealership," Jim said, setting down his coffee, "Brad asked specifically about you yesterday. Wanted to make sure the vehicle was meeting your expectations." Dorothy nodded, unsurprised. "He's learning." "Yes, he is," Jim agreed. "Mark says he's showing real improvement in how he approaches older customers. Your experience made quite an impression." "Sometimes being underestimated is an opportunity for education," Dorothy replied. As twilight deepened outside the windows, talk turned to plans for the summer. Emma and Tyler would graduate in May, then spend a few weeks helping Dorothy with some home repairs before their potential move to Chicago. Jim and Claire were considering a trip to Italy in August, their first real vacation in years. "You should come with us, Mom," Jim suggested. "You and Dad always talked about seeing Venice." "Perhaps," Dorothy said noncommittally. While the idea was tempting, she valued her independence too much to become the third wheel on their romantic getaway. As if reading her thoughts, Claire added, "My sister and her husband are interested in joining us too. It could be a small group tour." "I'll think about it," Dorothy promised, more sincerely this time. When the evening finally wound down and goodbyes were exchanged at the door, Jim lingered behind as Claire went ahead to start the car. "You're really okay, aren't you, Mom?" he asked softly, studying her face in the porch light. Dorothy smiled, understanding the deeper question. In the years since Robert's death, Jim had worried about her adjusting to life alone after 50 years of partnership. But she'd found her footing, creating a new normal that honored Robert's memory while embracing her continuing journey. "I'm really okay, Jim," she assured him. "More than okay. The car helps. The car is a symbol," she explained, "of moving forward, of remaining engaged with life, just as your father would have wanted." Jim hugged her tightly. "Love you, Mom." "Love you too, sweetheart. Drive safely." As their taillights disappeared down the street, Dorothy returned to her living room, moving quietly through the familiar space now filled with echoes of the evening's warmth and laughter. She picked up a framed photo from the mantel, she and Robert on their 40th anniversary, his arm around her waist, both of them beaming at the camera. "It was a good day, Robert," she told the photograph softly. "Our family is thriving, and I bought a sensible car with excellent safety ratings that still manages to be fun to drive. You would approve." Setting the photo back in its place, Dorothy gathered the remaining coffee cups to take to the kitchen. Tomorrow, she had plans to drive her new car to the Botanical Gardens in Columbus, a 60-mile trip she was looking forward to with quiet anticipation. Life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The invisible woman had been seen, her dignity acknowledged, her capabilities recognized, and in that recognition lay a profound victory, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been dismissed or underestimated. Dorothy smiled as she turned out the lights. Tomorrow would bring new roads to travel, both literally and figuratively, and she was ready for the journey.